Okay, everybody. Hi. It's Sunday night, and I we're doing a very special thing here on I Was Supposed to Have a Baby. We are talking to two individuals who can give us their perspective on World Down Syndrome Day. These are two people who I just really admire a tremendous amount, and I'm so excited to have them here. Dani Weiss-Bronstein and Chari Pere. Dani is on. She's going to be on in a second. And we're going to grab, here she is. Here's Dani. We're just going to wait for Chari. Say hello to everybody.
Hey everybody, I'm Dani. Nice to meet you.
So this is, and she's here. See? I just want to say to everybody that this is the first time that Dani and Chari have done an Instagram live. So we had a whole tutorial beforehand. It was very exciting. I love this is one of my favorite parts of doing Instagram because I get to introduce this technology to lots and lots of different people. So I'm thrilled to be able to do this. And now you guys will be able to do this yourselves also. I can't wait to see everything that you accomplish from here on out on Instagram because you're so super successful outside of this. Okay, so let's get right into it. Today, I know I'm just like totally awkward and ridiculous, but here we are. Okay, so today is World Down Syndrome Day. And Dani, you approached me a couple of weeks ago and said, hey, how about you want to do something about this? And I was like, I actually don't know anything about World Down Syndrome Day. And she said, yeah, and I think we should do this, and we should do this with Chari. And I said, great. So I want the two of you to introduce yourselves. Dani, I'm going to have you go first to tell everyone why this was important to you and why you approached me and said you wanted to do this. And then Chari, we're going to have you then introduce yourself, tell people who you are, people who don't know you already, and you're really the originator of this idea and these stories. So I'm going to let you take it away after that. So Dani, the floor is yours.
Sure. Hi everybody, I am Dani Weiss-Bronstein. I'm a Rebbitzin in the Hamptons. I'm a mom of four. I'm a doctoral student where my specialty is clinical social work and Jewish sexuality. I'm also the mom of a little boy who has Down syndrome. And Chari and I are friends. And I'm going to let Chari explain what exactly the connection is here.
Hi guys, I'm Chari. Sorry, what were you going to say, Amy?
No, I was going to say, and now to you. So perfect. Go ahead.
Okay. Hi everybody, I'm Chari Pere. I'm a cartoonist. I'm a mom of three. I try to use my cartoon powers for good. So I have, throughout my life, used my cartooning skills to do coloring books for kids with diabetes, a comic book about bullying, and during the pandemic, I've been doing this comic called Corona Mama, where I include my not so slow descent into insanity via humor and comics, and I have a coloring book that I have out on Amazon to help
and they've been
other
amazing.
Parents.
They've been amazing, by the way. These Corona Mama comics have been so spot on and amazing. So I just a quick plug for that. Sorry, I couldn't help myself. Keep going.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, whatever I can do to help people stay sane. And in 2014, I guess, I had a miscarriage, and I got really, really mad that so many people had it, and apparently it was this big secret that nobody talked about. People talk about it more now, but back in 2014, nobody talked about it. So I started putting together a comic that I eventually launched in 2017 with the help of actress Mayim Bialik. And it was a comic about my experience, a 10-page comic, and she shared it, and it led to a few other comics. It wasn't my first experience with creating comics and with that deep of material, because I had done a comic about an aguna. I was hired to do in 2009 a comic about one woman's story and how she got her Jewish divorce document from her abusive, cheating spouse after 10 years of struggle. And so I just always loved taking these very difficult topics and incorporating a universally friendly style, a really relatable style that it can be, doesn't matter what your background is, it doesn't matter what your religion is, you can understand what people are going through and empathize. So, I started after my miscarriage comic series, I basically started my cartoon mentory series where I document people's stories in comics. I did one about my experience, and then a fan of my first comic told his experience as a husband who had undergone his experience as having lost a baby through a miscarriage. And Dani.
I'm just going to stop you for 1 second. I'm going to link all of these things afterwards, after we get off this live. I'm going to link them in our bio so that you guys can access them, so you'll know what Chari's talking about. They are, I mean, they're incredibly powerful, these comics, incredibly powerful.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I'm glad that people have really responded to them. The entire purpose is just to help people feel not alone. Like you're not alone, and there are people who, if you need to talk to, you can reach out to them. It's just incredible how much of a secret some of these things are when it's totally, you can't control the miscarriage, you can't control the genes, but you can control your emotions and who you can reach out to.
Absolutely. Look, that's the exact, that's exactly the premise of I Was Supposed to Have a Baby. The power in telling the story, and telling the story in a way that allows people to access their own emotions and also bring people into that story and allow other people to be able to support them. So that's exactly what we do here. And it really matches very much in line to what we're trying to accomplish. Okay, so you're already doing this work. You're doing this really important work with comic, trying to bring these deep and difficult issues to light with your work. And so where does Dani come into all this?
Well, Dani and I were friends for a while, I think through my husband, probably other ways too, because you're all over all my friends' news feeds and shares on Facebook. So it was inevitable that we were going to be friends. And we ran into each other a couple of times in real life. And Dani, like me, she's very open with her experiences. So Dani and I were both pregnant with our babies around the same time, and when she was very open. She shared with everybody, please pray for me. I have to go to the doctor, and just she would keep updates on her experience. And and
hold on, go ahead,
sorry.
Dani.
Yeah, Dani.
I shared that there was stuff going on that I was concerned about, but
yes,
yeah.
And this was
yes.
Just to be clear about the timeline, this was how many years ago?
My little one is about to turn 6.
Okay.
So he was born 2015.
Okay.
And part of why Chari knew I was open, I had also written a series about what happened for Geek Mom.
Okay. What is Geek Mom?
Geek Mom is a blog that I was part of for geeky moms.
Another reason why the two of us get along really well.
Yeah.
Hence the reason why I think I also get along with the two of you very well. But moving on.
Absolutely.
Moving on. Okay, so you were doing this series for Geek Mom about...
I asked if I could write... it was the 1 year anniversary of when I'd gotten the call. And I asked if I could write. And it was the first time that I sat down to write about it.
And the call was...
I'll tell you more after Chari finishes.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, before we knew the exact details of what was going on with Dani's pregnancy, I just know I was carrying my rainbow baby at the time. So I had just been through a traumatic miscarriage. And to see Dani struggle, who's someone who I admire for not only being an amazing person, but amazing writer, a creative person, just really down-to-earth, kind individual, to see her struggling really resonated with me. So I just kind of would keep tabs on any time she had an update. And so, it was, and then to find out eventually about, what what had been going on in the pregnancy, and then really being impacted by her Geek Mom articles really struck a nerve with me, and I appreciated hearing her perspective. So when I was looking for a new topic to cover that wasn't necessarily miscarriage specific, but dealt with, having a childbirth, some kind of topic dealing with childbirth that wasn't miscarriage specific, I reached out to her to see if she was interested in collaborating, which I was very happy to hear that she was.
Okay, Dani, it seems like it's now your turn to start sharing
So
it from your perspective. So Chari came to you and said, "Hey, I'm doing this thing. Are you interested?"
my first thought was it'd be really, really cool to be involved in writing a comic. That's a style of writing I had never done before. I was a bit intimidated. I also was a little nervous because the process of writing the pieces for Geek Mom had emotionally wrung me out to the extent that, like, once a year I go back and read the pieces, and other than that, I don't look at them. Um, I remember sitting there and just sobbing my way through while writing, and it it was the first time that I was really openly dealing with everything. So let me back up a bit. So we had 3 kids, as the comic details. I had heavy bleeding and fibroids and couldn't get pregnant. My periods were very short, like every 2.5 to 3 weeks, and I was bleeding for 2 weeks, and I couldn't go anywhere, and it was just, I was homebound. But I had 3 amazing kids, so it was great. It wasn't great, but I was okay. And then 1 month, my period corrected itself, and I got pregnant. And like I did with all my kids, I went for a nuchal screen and all the early testing. And at the nuchal screen, the doctor said, everything looks great. You've got nothing to worry about. Cool, which is what they always say. And then I was with a different OB because we had moved to Great Neck. So I was with an OB I didn't really know. I found her when I realized I was 7 weeks pregnant with a fibroid and needed to see an OB. We didn't have a relationship. And she basically said, I want to just run genetic testing on you because they've updated it since you and your husband last did genetic testing. And I said, it seems a little funny because, like, genes are already set at this point, but whatever you want to do. They ran the blood work, and the last thing they did was a finger prick, and my blood sprayed across the room, and I vasovagal. So I started to black out. And as I'm blacking out, the nurse puts a piece of paper in front of me and says, you need to sign this for us to run the blood work. And I sign a paper. I go home. Once again, I'm bleeding. Turned out I had a hematoma. Fabulous. Okay. I'm about 13 weeks along. We're about to start really telling people. It's, I think, a Tuesday morning around 10 o'clock. So my husband's at work and my kids are at school and there's no one around. I'm sitting in the living room on the couch and the phone rings and it's this OB who says, okay, all your blood work came back and the blood tests are all in the normal range. But she says, this one test came back and there's a 99% chance the baby has Down syndrome. And I'm like, what? She says, yeah, there's a 99% chance the baby has Down syndrome. And I'm like, what do you mean? And she says, I'm sure you have questions, and so I'm going to want you to go see a geneticist, and you can call me back. And she hangs up. And I'm alone on a couch. And I'm trying to process. And I'm like, there's just no way. Can't be right. And the phone rings, and I'm like, it's got to be her calling back to be like, oops, wrong paper. And it's my father. And he says, hey, hon, how you doing? And I burst into tears, and I cry for 48 hours. And I can't say anything to my kids because what this test was, it turned out, was, and this flies against everything I learned in bio, they can draw blood from the mother and isolate fetal DNA and test it. So I never learned about this as a kid. I didn't know such a thing existed.
It's
They were
newer
supposed to inform
technology.
me.
It's newer technology.
Yes. So they were supposed to get informed consent, which was apparently the paper they put in front of me when I was blacking out.
Oh my God.
I had no idea such a test existed, to the extent that I called back and said, I hear there are genetic tests you can do. She's like, that's what we did. And I was like, oh, yeah. And then I spent the next like 4 months of my life delving into the data behind these tests to see how the 99% number doesn't mean what she thought it meant. And this was like my lifeline that I was holding on to. But that day, I couldn't reach my husband. You know those days, obviously. And my sister called. My sister, who I'm very close with, I need to say. But she said something really stupid, and I'm going to tell you so that you all know not to say this. She said, you'll be a great special needs mom, and your daughter will be a great special needs big sister. Right. I'm in a parent support group for those of us who really have had enough with like the, unicorns farting rainbows attitude towards Down syndrome. And this is an attitude that really, really irks everybody in the group of my personal growth has been worthwhile. I have grown so much from having this child. Obviously, we had the child. So when I finally reached my husband, I told him what was going on. He came home that day. And again, I was bleeding, so I was in Nido when he got home. I was on the couch. He sat in the recliner.
Hold on. Just for a second.
Sorry,
Just
say what
explain.
Anita is.
Just in case people
Sure.
don't know what you're talking about. Go ahead.
Yes. So in the Orthodox world, when there's any kind of blood flow from the uterine, you are in a spiritual state where the husband and wife are not supposed to touch. So I had a hematoma, and it was coming from the placenta, so that is considered uterine blood, and I could not touch my husband. And he came home, and he sat on the recliner, and I sat on the couch, and we looked at each other, and we cried because it was unfair. And it wasn't even our unfair. It was unfair that this yet to be developed human had a different trajectory mapped out already at 13 weeks of gestation. So unfair. And essentially something that's like one thing got, messed up in making a copy. That's what happened. How unfair to this baby. And then the calls started coming, see a geneticist, start thinking about an abortion. And I said, I can't. If you had asked me 10 years ago, would you abort for Down syndrome? I would have said, I don't know. But once it was in that moment, for me, it was a no. It wasn't even a question. That doesn't mean that I judge anyone else who would abort.
Yep.
At the same time, I think, and I saw this written up beautifully somewhere where it said, if someone handed you the list of challenges you were to have with each baby while you were pregnant, you would want to abort each one. And in a way, being told your baby might have Down syndrome while pregnant is torture. Because once that baby was in my arms, I knew it would be much better. But the maybe during pregnancy, I spent the entire time feeling like I was losing my mind. And people would say things to try to make you feel better. What if the baby's very high functioning? And I finally said to someone, you realize the odds of having a child who's high functioning on every single potential spectrum are the exact same odds as having a child who's low functioning on every single spectrum. So when you say that to me, I picture the exact opposite and think like, can I just accept whoever this will be? Right? Whatever baby is coming is going to be my baby. Yeah, it was difficult. And I say that also while, and this first time I was saying this publicly, my best friend, who's amazing, Orly Lieberman, if you need a therapist in the field of infertility, so she was really my ear in the beginning. And she said, you can say to me all the things that you're trying to keep inside that you're not supposed to say out loud. And I cried and I cried and I cried and I said, why didn't we use birth control?
Right.
And I'm not saying this because I regret having my son in my life. I don't. Right. But it's so overwhelming. And with Down syndrome in particular, there's both ignorance and fear-mongering that happens. I was told by multiple professionals that my child would never be able to nurse. That's not the case for a full year. And by the way, fat little boy. Um,
Delicious.
yeah, it's complex. And Down syndrome obviously is something that's very sensitive as far as abortion because it's one of the few things that is easy to test for. You're looking for an extra chromosome.
Right. Right. And I think, look, I want to make sure that we do justice to each of these pieces because there's a lot of
Yeah.
things to talk about here. I I want to like just go back for a second and Chari, when you reached out to Dani, was that after already her son was born, or was it during this pregnancy? Like when did that connection? I mean, obviously the two of you were friends, but specifically in regard to your work here, when did that piece happen?
Oh, it was years after. I think it was 2019. Is that it? I know my miscarriage comic was 2017. The follow up was 2018. So I think 2019. And so our
Somewhere
babies
around there.
were toddlers at that point.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So I just wanted to make sure to get the chronology correct because I wanted to be true to this. Okay. So then I'm going to turn it back over to you, Dani, and say, like, take us through the rest of the pregnancy. I mean, we'll get back to the, you
Sure.
know, ideas about potentially termination. We'll get back to the like we'll go get back to some of these ideas, but I want you to give sort of the rest of the story of the pregnancy and your life with your son and talk a little bit about that here before we move back to Chari.
You got it. So the pregnancy progressed in many ways completely normally because, as you may recall, all of the other screens were normal. This was a very healthy little boy, um, other than chromosomal abnormality. He had a slight heart murmur. I remember this was when I posted on Facebook, Chari, was we went for a fetal echocardiogram. And this was the big thing because about 50% of people who have Down syndrome have something structurally going on with the heart. And this was the moment when we were likely to find out if our baby was going to be ill or healthy. And I walked in and I didn't even realize how much I was holding inside. And he was very active and they had a really hard time actually doing the echocardiogram. But they got enough to say we were able to rule out 90% of heart conditions and all of the major ones. And in that moment, I felt not just relief, but such exhilaration. I wanted to go out and throw a party. Mamash, I wanted to throw like a Sudat Hoda'ah to thank God for all the good he had given us because I was not going to have a baby in NICU and open heart surgery, which obviously can also happen with kids who are typical, but the odds were higher. And that was a stress I had not allowed myself to feel until it was gone. Um, Obviously, I had fibroids. That made things difficult. This was the third pregnancy where I had gestational diabetes, and they put me on insulin. That was not fun. And then I also had contractions start at about 32 weeks. So they put me on medication, and the medication lowered my blood pressure, and that was fun. So I went off the meds at around 37 weeks, and I was going for non-stress tests. They saw that my fluids were low, and I went to the bathroom and I called my OB and I'm like, I went to the bathroom and I went to wipe and I leaned forward for the toilet paper and there was this like gush of clear liquid. And sorry if this is super graphic, everyone, but I have a lot of kids.
All
And I
good.
smelled it and it did not smell like pee. And she said, if it happens again, call me back. So I went to the bathroom and it happened again. And I call her, I'm like, so should I call you if it happens again? She said, sweetheart, you are going to the hospital and we are inducing you're having a baby tonight. And I was like, oh, okay. And we called a neighbor to come till my mother-in-law could get there. And I told my kids had like friends over, we weren't expecting this. And I told my kids we were going to the hospital and Chuck, which is what we called him when he was in utero, Chuck was going to be coming into the world. And my kids grabbed each other's hands and started dancing in a circle around the kitchen, singing and so excited. And we went and I was induced. I have a major fear of needles. So I try to have medication-free labors, which, yeah, they put me on full Pitocin, no epidural. It was a blast.
Ooh.
Yeah. And then the fibroid.
Ooh.
So Dr. Jessica Jacob saved my life. She was my OBGYN who I switched to because I left the awful one. Goodbye. Um, I had the baby. I was holding him cradled against me. I hadn't even looked at his face yet. As soon as he was born, she said, "This is definitely Down syndrome." Handed him off. I was holding him. This was around 2:20 in the morning. And she kind of like broke into my reverie and she said, "It's been about 20 minutes and the placenta hasn't come out yet. And I think it's stuck behind the fibroid." As the uterus started to shrink and the fibroid moved back up, we thought until about 25 weeks that I was going to need to have a cesarean section. And then the fibroid lifted enough. So she said, "We are going to go to the OR and I'm going to do what I can to get this out." And God bless her, we go into the hallway and they come out and they're like, "Okay, we're going to do, I don't remember if they wanted to do an epidural, whatever it was, they wanted to do a needle." And she said they were going to actually like knock me out properly. And they started arguing. They're like, "Didn't she eat?" She's like, "She had one piece of chicken at 6 o'clock and it is 2 a.m. And she's like stomping her foot at them. And she's like, "No, this woman just had a Pitocin birth with no epidural and you are not sticking needles into her now." And we get into the OR and they start like knocking me out. The last thing I see is this nurse unrolls this blue thing and I see Dr. Jacob's head whip around and she's wearing this short blonde sheetal and I see like the hair whip and I hear her say, "What do you think you're doing?" And the nurse is like putting out surgical implements. The last thing I hear is Dr. Jacob say, "If you think I'm cutting her open now," I wake up in recovery.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. My heart is like,
She reached in with her hand and pulled everything out so that she would not have to slice me open.
oh my goodness.
And then, thank you, fibroid. I had blood clots like up and up and up. I had to get cleaned out like 3 times. It was a nightmare. The last thing I had said before they took me to the OR, though, they said, "Are you going to be nursing?" And I said, "Yes." And then it's hours later, and I get into my room. It's 10 o'clock in the morning, and I look at my husband and I go, "Can you make sure they fed the baby?" And he's like, "What do you mean?" I'm like, "Well, I said I was nursing, but then I went to the OR and I've been in recovery and I just got to the room and not really in any condition to go to NICU and like check. Can you go make sure that they're feeding him?" He's like, "Of course they're feeding him at the hospital." And I was like, "No, please go check." And he went and he came back to report that the baby had been on a glucose drip and was in NICU and had tongue thrust and blood sugars were all over the place and temperature was all over the place. And when he went back 2 hours later after the first bottle, that had all fixed itself.
Amazing.
Yeah. So then the kids came to meet the baby. And I called a very wise friend, Amy Reese, who's a pediatrician in Great Neck. And I said, "Amy, I need your help because I have to tell my kids what's going on before they hear it in school." And she's amazing. She said, "Your kids know other people who have syndromes. So talk to them. Talk to them about the people they know and the physical challenges and like the implications of having the syndrome and just be honest." And I was. And I mean, it's hilarious. Little kids, you know, one of my kids is dancing around going, "Why does the baby look Japanese?" And I'm like, okay, and can't tell a 5-year-old they're being racist because they're not. They're curious.
Right.
Right. Yeah. It took like some very subtle reminding and reminding. They got there. Well, he said essentially, the same way that you have people in the family or you have friends who have syndromes and they look a little different, these are the things you'll see. You'll see that the baby's eyes are a slightly different shape than yours, and the baby's pinkies are a slightly different shape than yours, and the baby's big toe sticks out a little bit more than yours. And the challenge for this baby is going to be, we don't know what stuff, but some stuff will come a little slower to him than anyone else.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
Yeah.
And so my question is, I mean, we could go backwards and forwards, but your life with your son and with your family, and take us, give us just a couple of minutes of sort of like, from the time he was born until, let's call it, what was it, Chari? 2017, 19? I don't remember anymore.
Wait, the comic?
Yeah, when you reached out to Dani and said, I think I'd like to do this.
We started working on it, I think, in 2018, and we released it
Okay.
in 2019.
That
Okay.
sounds right.
Okay. So you had already gotten to the point, like, when did you start writing for Geek Mom? At what period?
Oh man, that's a good question. I started writing for Geek Mom.
About
I'd been
this.
writing for
About this.
ah this. I wrote it on the 1 year anniversary of getting that phone call.
Okay.
So December 10th, I believe,
Okay.
of 2015 was when I started writing. And you can read the pieces. I've never gone back to edit them. Typos, whatever raw emotions are in there. That's it. So we ended up moving to Scranton, Pennsylvania, which is where I grew up. And we were there for the last 5 years. Part of that was because it's a really small town, and the early intervention there was phenomenal. It's the kind of place that I would call and say, he's getting OT every other week. I think he needs it every week. And they would say, okay.
Amazing.
Right. You don't get that in New York.
Correct.
Right. And it was really good from 0 to 3. He was doing really well. There's probably another diagnosis we're missing for him, which, again, can happen with any kid. At this point, he is, in many ways, he's nonverbal, but he communicates to the extent that the one comment everybody makes when they meet him is, he's really funny. Now, you tell me how a 5-year-old with Down syndrome, who's mostly nonverbal, can be funny. I don't know, but he is hilarious. And he's clever. He figures things out. He's super active. He's always running around. I mean, like, we cannot keep him in the house. He just wants to be outside running and playing and kicking balls and climbing. And thank God he's healthy, he's strong, and he has Down syndrome.
So your processing of everything that happened to you, and your everything that went on during that pregnancy, during the delivery, and sort of the aftermath of raising this child and advocating for him, and wanting the best for him, and trying to protect him from the rest of the world also, besides like educating your own family. I mean, so all of that was sort of happening, and it was happening across, like, on a daily basis or on a monthly basis, every time you met new people, every time you came into a new circumstance. And yet there, at each stage, there were still other pieces that would come up, which would sort of bring back some of these initial pieces for you emotionally.
Yeah. I think one thing that's been challenging for the family is the kids have run into other kids who are very unkind. There are kids who will freely use the R word, and not just in general, but specific to my child.
Can you use the R word just so people know what you're talking about?
Absolutely.
I do, but
yes. And I'm warning you now that a lot of people in my community find this immensely offensive. But if you look at my child and you call him retarded, there's a decent chance one of my children will punch you, and I will not punish them.
Excellent.
It's extremely hurtful.
Excellent.
And, to have children ask questions, I grew up with the facial difference. I understand. Children have questions, children ask questions, and they deserve answers. But children also need to be taught how to ask. And the adult's response next to them is always very telling. So if a child walks over and says, why does he look like that? That's a perfectly neutral question. And you give them a reasonable answer. If a child walks over and starts making negative comments, hurtful comments, he looks weird, he's ugly. There's no reason in the world that anybody should have to respond to something like that. unfortunately, these comments happen within the religious community. I have found that there are parts of the community that really don't want to talk about this. I had teachers ask me to come in to talk at the school, and a principal who said, "This is not an appropriate topic for children." And I said, "How could a child not be an appropriate topic for children?" I don't understand. And the children in school all know him.
What exactly was not appropriate?
Unclear. But I was very clearly told not to come in. Yes. So, okay. And I will say also in the Frum community that the R word is used very freely. And for a community that is very sensitive in a lot of ways, this is a sensitivity that we have not found yet. And I'd really like to see us get there.
What do you think, I mean, let's just go there for a second. What is the appropriate response when a child, or let's say a child, because I think children are really the only ones who are allowed in a, they're given the allowance to ask questions without being told that they're whatever. I'm like losing my words, but basically children with their innocence ask questions that adults don't because adults have filters, hopefully.
Sometimes.
Hopefully. So when a child asks, why does he look like that? What is the response as opposed to when the child asks or says, ooh, he's so ugly? Like what are your responses to those two questions?
So to the first one, they get the same kind of answer that my kids got when we brought him home from the hospital. A short, easy to understand explanation that he's, a normal kid who has a syndrome, and the syndrome is visible on his face. To a kid who's rude, kids are not rude to me. A rude kid is never going to be rude near an adult. We all know that. A rude kid is going to be rude to the other kids, to the siblings. And my kids have clear instructions that they do not need to engage. In fact, it's happened here in our shul in the Hamptons, where there have been kids who are rude. And the entire larger friend group will come together and basically be like, how could you say that? You're so nasty. He's beautiful. Like, they have his back. And he has no idea what's going on. He's off playing on the side. He has no clue, but they have his back.
Amazing.
Yeah, adults give it away in other ways. Like the adult who said, it's so amazing how you take him out in public with you. Or when I was in a WhatsApp chat with college friends and they were all talking about, they were all talking about what they had accomplished that year. And I said, I have had 0 accomplishments this year. And someone said, but look at how well you're coping with your son. And I wanted to write back, look at how well you're coping with your new husband. But instead I left the group. So I think one message I really would like to give over is, in the same way that people have learned really to be sensitive when you have friends who are struggling with fertility and pregnancy loss, when you have a friend who has a kid who's in just a different reality, be sensitive. It's lonely out here. We don't get invited out so often. And when we get invited out, we don't always get invited back. And my son has exactly one family that invites him for play dates. God bless the Hersticks. They are lovely and amazing. That's our chazan out here. One. And it hurts.
Okay. All right. There's more to say, but I want to transition over to Chari.
Yeah.
So Chari, you watched this all. I mean, meeting Dani, speaking to her, seeing stories on Facebook, connecting with her offline. And so, you in your professional role, telling these really important stories about pregnancy, about loss, about people going through different challenges in their lives. And so you reach out to Dani saying what?
Well, just I'm always open for new topics to tackle that haven't been tackled yet. I've got a list of topics I'd love to tell in the comic format. But, Dani, her way of sharing information, her way of speaking, um, her openness was just something that I was just so drawn to. And, we had a wonderful time seeing each other over like a Passover getaway. And I got to see, my baby along with her baby. And, it really was just so much fun to see the families together. And I was game to tell her story because I think that it's one that I don't see. Miscarriages, I see a lot more in discussion about now, more than things like stillbirth, more than other topics that still need to be addressed. But I just felt like she, and just having the story laid out in the Geek Mom, it was all there. So if she wanted to, the great thing about comics is that, words, you imagine what happens, right? But in comics, through the less graphic way than telling stories through photography, like you can ease into difficult topics. And with the simple illustrations that I use, it also feels a little bit more iconic in a way that you can feel like you're in Dani's shoes. And you can do, metaphors that makes sense. I have one panel where, when Dani mentioned that she cried for 48 hours. So, in the comic it says 36 hours. So, I wrote the emotional forecast. So today, tonight, tomorrow, and it's just like the eye closing and
yes,
and tears coming down, like it's raining tears. So there are ways to add humor also, so that it's not, one of the things about life is that it's not all heavy and it's not all funny and it's not all perfect. So I try in my comics to show the highs and show the lows so that it's not all crying in the bed crying in the bed, crying to your parents, crying to friends. It's not all that. It's the win, and it's the, the moments that good things happen too. So in each of my comics, I try to be conscious of being a truthful storyteller, in a way that's very true to life. Donnie's just Dani herself encompasses all of that. So I was just really happy to be able to bring it to life in a way that can help others on a different scale than just the written text.
Amazing. And so how did this, I mean, so as the two of you are sitting and the story, and Dani is telling you the different pieces, what, as an illustrator, what is your thought process in terms of which pieces to give over, which pieces to hold back, what's necessary, what's not necessary? Like, how do you make that decision, those decisions?
Well, with every collaboration, it's different. So, for my comic, it was pretty easy because it was my comic. And then when I told the story about a husband's perspective in his miscarriage, he just sent me, I think, an 8 to 10 page document that I pulled out. And Dani, just a stream of thought. And Dani, I was just really lucky that she was down to, tell it as perfect a way as possible into in an actual script. So she was up for the challenge of turning it into a comic. So Dani really did all the heavy lifting, and we would discuss things where it's like, okay, we don't want to just talk. With comics, the difference between comics and illustrated kids books is that you have a narration that can tell a little bit of the word, and then you want the visuals to not be simply a repetition of what's going on in the caption or in the dialogue bubbles that are there. So the illustrations had to also advance the story. So there's 3 components to telling the story. So, Dani would have her story, and I'd be like, okay, that's great, but, how about in this section we just do a metaphorical image, or this panel is just going to be text, or this one, you have the actual, the conversations on Facebook. Let's throw the Facebook conversation in, so it's not just dialogue, just a way to shake things up. And Dani, add some of your story about have challenges of looking a little bit different in life too. Are you down for discussing that part of you? So it was more of an editorial direction rather than me writing the story. So whenever I collaborate with someone, I give them the option. Do you want to write it? Do you want me to write it? Do you want to just do stream of consciousness? Do you want me to record you? Like, what is the best way to tell a story for you? And I try to work with the people to tell their story in the way that they feel happiest and feel like it's most about themselves, and they feel confident that that I'm the one who can help bring their reality, in a way that for the rest of their lives, this is the piece that best embodies themselves and that will help others in the same situation.
Look, that's incredible. And it makes sense because each person has their own unique piece of it and has what they want to say. And also, what will play well and how to manipulate the different pieces to make it sort of run and be most effectual to the reader. So that makes
Right.
sense.
And then there are tough calls too, because there are parts of the story where it's like, this was a big part of my experience. And I'm like, yeah, but we only have 10 pages because we don't want people to be impatient. So as much as that's an important part, it doesn't advance the story,
Right.
and it doesn't help the Down syndrome cause. That's more of like a story about pregnancy or childbirth gone bad. I mean, that whole part with you
Right.
going under, I don't think we included that because it didn't advance the Down syndrome story. That's just like, we can't include, and it's tough. It's very tough. And sometimes I tell a story and like, but this part was so important to me. And I'm like, yeah, but you need to remember what the message is.
Yes.
And so if you start saying, well, this is what happened and that is what happened, you're going to lose track of the story and the actual impact. So simpler is better.
Yes, 1,000%. And I get that also when people submit pieces to me as well. There are times where I take that editorial license also, and I'll say, yeah, this doesn't further the story, doesn't further what I'm trying to do here. So therefore, it has to be condensed in a certain way. So yes, I 1,000% get that. Dani, I'd love for you to go back to what Chari was saying in terms of your own personal experience with having a port wine stain and how that colored your thoughts about your pregnancy with your son and and you bring this up very beautifully in the comic, Chari. I mean, you get right into it, and it's like it's laid out there for everyone to see that these were emotions that you were grappling with. But can you elaborate a little bit on that now for everyone and how that affected you?
Sure. It's interesting because I asked my parents after I had him, how did you tell everyone when I was born? And when I was born, by the way, my port wine stain was like this, and I had laser surgery over 4 years and then stopped when I hit puberty because I like it. And they don't remember. They don't remember how they told anyone. Okay. So when I was little, my parents did a really good job of telling me exactly what my birthmark was and that nobody had the right to make me feel bad about having one. And that really gave me the ability to handle whatever came my way. And that's where I first learned that lesson. If somebody asks politely, what's on your face? You tell them. And if someone's a jerk, you have the right to be a jerk back. And I was. I remember distinctly at Camp Sternberg, some little girl came up and snottily was like, what's on your face? Yeah. And I told her a story about playing with my mom's makeup and super glue and this accident, and it's just what happened. I mean, and yet my sister remembers hearing me at 5 years old calmly explaining to another little kid exactly what it was, which was that after I was born, they saw me curl up and I was sucking my thumb with my hand pressed against my face like this. And this was my handprint. I was sucking my thumb like that in utero and created the birthmark. Yeah. So it's weird because I have definitely experienced people being really rude. Someone once said to me, the first time I saw you, I had to run away. Like when you see a horrible car crash? And I was like,
oh my gosh.
All right. I always thought it was pretty, but whatever. But the difference is my son, he might not have that ability ever to throw it back at people, to shrug it off. And for me, it is really just superficial. This is just how my skin looks. For him, Most people, when they have a lower IQ or if they have low muscle tone, you don't know until you really get to know them. There are kids in every private school has kids who have an IQ of 85 or 90. But my son's face gives you the heads up that he's going to have a lower IQ, and so he's treated differently. We actually just had this when there was a long quarantine at his school, and his teacher was on Zoom and said, let's do an array of 3 colors and see if he can pick out one of the 3. And I was like, one of 3? And she said, yeah. She said, we can't do 2 because then it's 50% chance. She's explaining to me how to do this array of 3 and like move things around and make it difficult for him. And I pulled out the Lego and I put out 8 different colored pieces. And I said, okay, baby, where's white? Where's brown? Where's pink? Where's green? There's this assumption that he can't. This imposed limitation. And that's very frustrating. And the balance I find as a parent to this child is I don't want to be the one who's limiting him, but I also need to be conscious of where his limits are so I'm not unfair to him. And it's a balancing act constantly. But really, when Chari reached out to me, I think ultimately what spoke to me was that we had both gone through this process of grieving a loss and then accepting life and moving on to find beauty. In my case, though, it was within the same pregnancy. There was a real loss of the assumed child I was having, the picture in my head. And I had to fully grieve that and let it go before I could accept what our reality was. I'm also going to recommend that if you have a friend who finds out that they are having a child with Down syndrome, please do not send them the essay about going to Holland. Everybody has read it.
Why?
Why don't send it?
Yeah.
Nothing helps but your own process. I had a group of like 8 people I was emailing throughout the pregnancy, and I was being very honest about what was going on because I needed to just talk. And once in a while, someone would send me an article about someone who found out at birth or this beautiful little baby who had DS. I could not look at a child who had Down syndrome without bursting into tears. I just couldn't do it. And again, I knew that if he actually had it, because that screen we had was not a diagnostic.
Right.
If he actually had it, I knew that once he was with me, it would be easier emotionally than it was during the pregnancy. And it is. One thing I did do was I did reach out to a support network, the Down Syndrome Diagnosis Network, and I'm still hooked into them on a Facebook group. It's the Rockin' Moms. We are all mothers who had babies in the first half of 2015 with DS. And while most of our babies are thriving, I will say that 2 of those babies died in the first year. And it was very difficult. And I am not here to fearmonger about Down syndrome, and I'm not here to blow glitter up your face. It's challenging, but his life has value. He has value. And not because of what he gives us, because of who he innately is.
Right. Do you, and what do you say? I mean, we talked a little bit about it earlier. We spoke about the abortion and the termination piece. To get back into it a little bit, for you and for many people in the Jewish community, I'm going to sort of use it like say it sort of broadly. For many people in the Jewish community, there are things that are there's a line in the sand. There is the diagnoses that are incompatible with life that one can get at 12 weeks, sometimes one can get at 20 weeks or beyond. And there are the diagnoses that are not incompatible with life, like Down syndrome. And even with the diagnoses that are incompatible with life or incompatible with any sort of quality of life, there is a very big difference of opinion within the rabbinic community, the clergy, the Jewish clergy, in terms of, and also in different communities. Certain communities in no circumstance, regardless of whether the psychological health of the mother is, regardless of whether the psychological health of the mother or the family would possibly be harmed by carrying a pregnancy like this to term, under no circumstance does that community or that specific clergy allow for a termination. And then even all the way on the other side, there are individuals who carry perfectly healthy pregnancies, genetically perfect pregnancies, who, for whatever the reason is, whether it's physical health, whether it's emotional health, whether it's whatever it is, there are clergy that do give the dispensation for termination. And so this diagnosis of Down syndrome is neither here nor there. And so you said already here, and you and I have spoken about this beforehand, for you and your family, the discussion of termination was never going to be part of this picture.
Yeah, it was a non-starter.
But just tell me a little bit more about this and families that sort of go through this.
So it's complicated. This screening, actually, I'm not such a fan because it's often presented as a diagnostic, and it does need to be confirmed through something invasive. So you would need to confirm this through CVS, which is, oh my gosh, my brain.
Chorionic villus sampling. Go ahead.
Thank you. Or
amniocentesis.
Yes, amniocentesis.
I'm the doctor in the room, so you know.
Thank you. My brain is just not with me tonight. They both carry some degree of risk for miscarriage. They both also should only be done if there is a medical reason to do it, meaning, in my instance, where I was not going to be terminating no matter what, there was literally no reason to add risk to an already risky pregnancy, because it would just give me an answer that I would know anyhow in a few months, and it wouldn't change anything about how we were handling the pregnancy. The problem is when this is presented as a diagnostic and there are false positives and false negatives. So there are some cases that have been talked about where there were false positives and people terminated because they did not want a child with Down syndrome, and it turned out to be a typical child, which I don't know how people handle it. I've also read about cases where it was a real positive and people terminated because they were told your child will never walk and your child will never talk and your child will never this. And then they met babies who had Down syndrome and are like, wait a minute, this is not what I was told was going to happen. I was told I was going to have a baby like in a bed, just like slowly dying. Well, that's really not usually the case with Down syndrome.
Does that really still happen in today's day and age with the advent of the internet and, you know, so much knowledge that we have? Is that still happening?
I think, yes, it is still happening. I think part of why it happens, it's two things. First of all, there are fewer people being born with Down syndrome today, so fewer people meet them. Second is, for people our age, I know that my mental picture of Down syndrome is still not my son. It's still the people I knew when I was a child. Down syndrome was very different in the 80s and 90s. Part of that was because the way it worked in the US was people were put into institutions. And in institutions, they had very little one-on-one attention. They were not getting interventions. They often were not even getting their dental needs taken care of. They literally would have their teeth rot out of their mouth. They had extremely low muscle tone. They never really learned social skills or how to talk, right? So you're taking someone and you're basically stripping them of every opportunity for growth and then saying, this is what it is.
Right.
And I believe the average lifespan was between 23 and 25.
Okay.
By the time I had Shy, just a few years later, the average lifespan was already about 65. And the data shows a few things that made a big difference. The top one from what I saw was that people were bringing their children home. And then obviously related, all the disability changes that have happened in the world since the 70s and 80s, the fact that we have early intervention, the fact that we provide health insurance, the fact that they now know that people with Down syndrome need more dental care so they can see dentists 3 times a year. And you have average IQs going up. Now, I want to be very clear. If somebody has Down syndrome and has an IQ of 40, they still have value as a human being. But the fact that we can now help people unlock their potential, it's a different world.
Yep. Right. So so I guess the question is, and I want to be cognizant of time, and sort of we're at the hour mark here.
Mm-hmm.
For both of you, I'm going to let each of you answer this question. What have you, since putting this comic out, since, yes, obviously, Dani, you were public about your story beforehand. You were on Geek Mom. The people in your community knew about this, but Chari's taking of it and, taking this comic and bringing it to an entire new audience brought new attention to this. So since doing this story and since coming together and doing this comic, what have you learned about the human race and people? And what advice would you give to people who are going through anything? But Dani, I mean, look, Chari, you specifically, this is not your story. Your story is one of difficulty and the losses, and you're being moved to tell stories. But so my question to you is, what do you tell people who are going through something challenging? And what's your advice, having been through it yourself? And Dani, for you, what do you say to people who find out that they have a child who has Down syndrome potentially, because no diagnosis, as you said, is confirmatory unless you're doing these more invasive procedures? And I'll let you answer this first, and let Chari close us out.
The truth is, I can tell them that, I'm happy, and I can tell them that he's happy, and I can tell them pretty much anything they want to hear. I can provide all kinds of data. But until they go through their own process, first of deciding if they can handle it or not, in which case data can help. But if they're going to have the child, they're going to need to work through their process. I personally don't know of anyone who didn't grieve some degree. I'm sure there's some magical unicorn out there who was just like, great, my baby has Down syndrome. I don't know that person yet. But when they're ready, there's a really crazy, loving, loud community of parents ready to catch them. And I'm one of them.
Incredible. Chari.
Yeah, I guess when you go through challenges, I mean, first of all, the important thing is to realize that to hop on what Dani said, like what you experience is going to be different than what someone else experiences. So, it's important to find your people. I mean, with my miscarriage, my husband happened to be out of town. I dropped him off at the airport, got the bad diagnosis, picked him up from the airport after apparently the baby bled out of me. So, during that time, it's about finding the right people, about surviving the negative comments, or the not necessarily negative, the triggering. Like, Dani had said that people will say things to you that they think they're trying to help. But honestly, it's okay to get off the phone and then, get a pint of ice cream and then cry it out. Like, it's totally okay. You remember the kind, speaking of pint of ice cream, I remember the person who brought over a pint of ice cream because she was one of the few people who spoke about having miscarriages, and she knew how to handle it. So, you turn to the people who are your support team, and, and then, you got to cope the way I remember the month afterwards, just giving myself the space to grieve. And then, realizing that the next pregnancy, thank God it was healthy, but it's the waiting part is just, is it okay? Is it going to be okay? Like that, getting through, but honoring your feelings. And then, I guess for me, being open and helping other people, I really believe in that. If you go through something, it's important to share it because it will help others. And also what you have gone through is not in vain. So doing what I can to make the most out of whatever is thrown my way. And, which is what I'm doing now with my Corona Mama comics and my, whatever I'm trying to create material to help other people. ultimately to know that they're just not alone. You know, that you're seen, you're not alone, and there are other people in the same boat as you.
Absolutely. And even more so, both Chari and Dani have both said that if any of you out there are struggling with any of these issues that you think, and you think that they could help, they want to be a resource for you. So I will link them. You can reach out to them at any point, and I will put links to the different comics and the different writings so that all of you can take a look and see about the history of all of this and what we're talking about. But these decisions are not easy, and these experiences are not easy. Chari, Dani, thank you so much. This conversation is also not an easy conversation, but it has to be had. We have to talk about hard things because it's exactly what you said, Chari. When we talk about it, we know then that we're not alone and that there's so many other people who are going through it. So thank you both for doing this with me. I'm incredibly grateful, Dani, for the inspiration for this. And everybody, good night. This will be saved, God willing. This will be saved so that you can have it here on IGTV, and then also we'll move it to YouTube shortly. Okay? All right. Good night, everybody. Good night.
Bye.
Bye.